Open your ears and lube up your butthole. It's time for the What Do We Call It podcast. Now, here's your host. It's Jmann. Welcome to the What Do We Call It podcast. I'm Jmann.
This is Steiny.
Hey man, how's it going?
Are you familiar with the band Sleep Token?
No.
Okay, they're from overseas in the UK.
Okay.
They bash together a bunch of genres. Some people liken them to like a heavy metal or doom metal version of Imagine Dragons at times. Because there's pop, there's jazz, there's blues, there's metal. The guy has a very soulful voice.
Okay.
The reason I bring them up, they have a new album coming out in like a week. And they've been getting airplay on 93X around here lately. Which I was like, oh,
wow.
Well, that's a thing. I guess I can't enjoy them anymore.
Yeah, right? The kiss of death.
Now, I have been a fan of these guys since 2018. So I'm not like some Johnny-come-lately to the party, and everybody's jizzing their pants over their new single, Chokehold.
Sure.
And I just have to say this. When I like something, if it's under the radar, if it suddenly becomes immensely popular, I'm torn between, hooray, they're getting their dues and making money and will continue to be able to do this.
Right.
But deep down, the stronger emotion is, son of a bitch, I can't like this anymore like I used to because it doesn't feel pure any longer, because every Tom, Dick, and asshole that hears it is going to glom on and be like, oh, this is so cool. Have you heard these guys? They're so fucking awesome. And when douchebag pieces of shit start to like something that I like, it makes me not want to like it anymore.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it's by association. It drags it down. And I found, too, that this phenomenon almost always changes the music that the band's putting out as well. You know what I mean?
Yeah, there'll be pressure to continue to appeal to this much larger audience that they've cultivated all of a sudden.
Right, and so the sound changes, and it's not even what you liked originally about them anyway. You know, the first albums, the first few CDs or whatever.
Can you give an example of that from the past?
Well, I know we have different opinions on Machine Head and at various times and when they kind of went bad and when they kind of came back again. But they were one that kind of sold out a little bit, I thought, or kind of changed their sound once they started getting big after their second album. Maybe the third album?
Well, it was Burn My Eyes, The More Things Change, and then The Burning Red.
The Burning Red, right?
Is where they went full-on fucking new metal with
kind of
rap
new metal.
Influence.
Right, and while I liked it, I felt like they were trying to appeal to a mass sound and therefore had changed their original core. Now, granted, you had lineup changes. You didn't have the same drummer. I believe they were going with a different guitarist because their original guitarist from the first two albums went to Soulfly. I mean, so, there was a bit of musical evolving, right, that was going to happen anyway. Mm-hmm. But the reason why I think they get maligned for that album is because they were, instead of staying almost true to their sound, they were trying to adapt to a bigger sound that was being put out there. And even though they did it well, even though I liked it, it still wasn't Machine Head. And I think what a lot of their core fans expected of them,
Well, and then they put out the album after that. The one that came out...
Supercharger?
Yeah, Supercharger.
Yeah.
And then that thing got fucking tanked because it came out around 9/11, and the record company's like, I don't think people want to hear the song Crashing Around You after 9/11.
Yeah. Yeah.
They were big victims of that one.
Yep.
So now with Sleep Token, they are touring the United States. Mm-hmm. The entire tour sold out.
Are they headlining it, or are they with somebody?
Yes, they are the only act. There's no opener.
Oh, cool.
It's only them. And I don't know where they're playing around here. I want to say it's like the Myth or something.
So a decent enough venue. I mean, that's not tiny.
So they've been popular, but it still felt like it was enough of fly under the radar popular. They had appeal to various different subgenres and groups of music fans. But once I hear them on commercial rock radio, I feel like this is too much. Some guy who likes to get pissed drunk and beat his wife and smoke cigarettes while he's roofing houses is enjoying this. Some woo girl who drinks way too much at parties and makes an ass out of herself is enjoying this. Yeah. Like, too many fuckers that I don't like, and it shouldn't affect me because them enjoying it doesn't stop any past enjoyment I've had. but it feels like it's spoiled.
I completely understand what you're saying. So back in the late 90s, mid to late 90s, I was getting into metal, and metal basically went underground around that time. I don't know if a lot of people remember. Metal, like hard rock and metal, kind of reached its heyday in the late 80s, early 90s, and then it was like a shift change. Like everything became R&B, hip-hop, rap. I mean, that was all you ever saw on MTV anywhere anymore. And so metal kind of went underground, and for the longest time it was cool being in the subculture, going to concerts and being able to be just a few rows back or in just like a group of people where you could press up and be close to the stage. And then all of a sudden in the late 90s, early 2000s, metal became mainstream again, and it was cool to see it. And I get that same enjoyment you had, but then to see everybody and their mother's uncle into Rammstein when nobody who knew how Rammstein was, and all of a sudden Du Hast was everywhere, and you're like, no, like this was kind of my thing that nobody else knew about, you know?
It's funny you mentioned Rammstein, because when they hit the radio, I'd never heard of them, but then I heard that song, and I went and bought that album.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed the shit out of it. And I'm like, okay, so the radio helped me discover this, but obviously that was before the internet was everywhere. True. And there was no satellite radio or all these other avenues to discover new artists.
Absolutely. So in that regards, I have heard things on 93X over the years that I've gone, oh, I never heard that before, and then I explore a little bit more, and I like the band. There's also been a lot more at the other end of the spectrum where it's
butt rock.
Yeah.
But the thing of it now is, like, if you listen to 93X,
yeah,
they're going to play legacy artists. They're going to play Bush and Green Day,
yeah,
and Disturbed, which is arguably like one of the biggest butt rock bands ever to be a butt rock band.
They're
Metallica,
like arena rock,
Slipknot, yeah. But they play like fucking Motionless and White and whatever the fuck happened to Bring Me the Horizon, what they are now.
Yeah.
And
that was one of the bands I was thinking of. Bring Me the
Falling
Horizon.
in Reverse, yeah. Bad Wolves, just corporate radio rock is at its shittiest of all fucking time, because when nu metal hit and they're like, fuck, we got to get on board. And then you would hear Slipknot, you'd hear Power Man 5000, Static X, Godsmack, Disturbed, Korn, Limp Bizkit, all these artists, like when you say the metal resurgence, when it just came back up. And then you'd still hear, you know, Nick Davis on Saturday nights for the Extreme Metal Shop, and he'd play your Fear Factories and your Cradle of Filths and shit like that.
Dimmu Borgir and all sorts of stuff. And that's actually one of the few things I liked. I still liked Pit Radio and stuff like that, and I liked some of that lesser well-known stuff, but I found even that I had a hard time keeping up with, you know what I mean? Because there were so many bands that I was getting out of touch with. You know, I could no longer stay that true to the scene either.
Well, it's kind of like, and to not sound like we're just a couple of shitty old men that are like, oh, those kids are ruining it.
Right.
Because I think the average 93X listener's got to be 30 and up, if not 35 and up. It's weird.
Oh, it's our demographic, and maybe within even 5-10 years of me, like my age.
Because we're 40 and 45.
Yep.
So
I'm thinking.
Yeah. One thing that I want to point out is, like, this is not a new phenomenon. This isn't because I've gotten old and crotchety. No. I remember when Stained first came out.
Oh, yeah.
And I saw them live. And this is before Dysfunction even came out.
Okay. Yep.
And then they had that album, and Mud Shovel was on the radio.
I was going to say, Mud Shovel was my favorite song, and it was originally on a compilation album. They, like you said, it wasn't even released yet, and I loved it. But anyway, go on.
So then they came out with Break the Cycle, which once Outside blew up, you're like, uh-oh, now everybody likes this.
Yep.
And then the album after that, was it 13 Shades of Grey or 15 Shades of Grey?
Something like that, yeah.
Okay, that one was not as depressive.
Cold's 13 Ways to Bleed on stage, but yeah.
So then everybody was way too into Stain, and I was like, I still kind of like them, but I was starting to get that effect. I really got that effect with Linkin Park.
Their first album was absolutely fantastic. That was one of those albums that I could listen to nonstop over and over and over again when it first came out. But then everything thereafter was just kind of a letdown to me afterward.
Well, I saw them live when they were touring on Hybrid Theory. Alien Head Farm opened.
Oh, okay, sweet.
So back when they did
Annie, Are We Okay?
Yeah.
Back when they redid
their Smooth Criminal cover.
Smooth Criminal.
And then I'll just say there were way too many kids at that show that had no business being at that show because they didn't seem to be hard rock fans.
Mm.
They just, I like this band. And it's shitty because I want to be able to go to the show and not be fucking nuts to butt from floor to ceiling and wall to wall with all these douche nozzles breathing right in my face and spilling beer on me. That's what I want. I want this to stay mine. I'm being greedy. Why do you have to fucking do this? Do you know that I listened to Crazy Town a year and a half before Butterfly hit the radio? Because when the album came out, The Gift of Game,
Yep.
somebody in a magazine talked about the single Toxic. I bought it. There was a track on there with a guest spot from KRS-One. And I was like, fuck yeah, I love KRS-One.
Yeah, yep.
And then there was just Butterfly that was just this anomaly on the album. And then it became a radio rock thing. And then it was everywhere. And they were everywhere. And they were making way too much money. And you're like, everybody just thinks they have one good song. You guys don't realize that they had a bunch of good songs.
They did. It's funny you bring that up because that was back in my disposable income days where I could just buy CDs, maybe one or two a week even.
Yeah.
And I remember when that one came out, and I think it was like some recommendation or I had read it somewhere, and I picked it up exactly the same type of thing a little bit before that song came out. And that song was on like a movie, and I forget what movie it was in. But
Butterfly?
Yeah.
Not another teen movie, I think.
It was
There
something
was
like
a
that.
cheerleading scene where they were doing some dumbass routine
dance to it. Yeah. Yep. And I'm like, after I saw that, I went, oh no. Like I knew right away that.
Ruined.
Yep.
Fucking ruined.
Well, but yeah, they had a bunch of other really good songs off that album. And in fact, I didn't even like listening to Butterfly.
It's funny because I don't get this way necessarily about movies. It seems like music is the easiest of artistic mediums to have this problem. Like TV shows, well, they don't change TV shows because more people watch them of a certain kind. I would like in the 90s because Married with Children got so popular. They didn't, because of pressure from, the parent-teacher council and shit, try to dumb it down. They fucking doubled and tripled down.
Yeah, they amped it up.
And like there's all kinds of kids at school that like that or liked Home Improvement or liked Roseanne.
Same with The Simpsons. Remember, there was all that controversy. I don't know if you remember, but Bart Simpson was a bad role model.
It's because he said, eat my shorts, and he was disrespectful to authority. He was
disrespectful, and he was underachiever and proud or something like that was one of his other slogans or something like that. Mm-hmm. There was a battle for our moral fiber back then, and then they just gave up.
Well, if there's one TV show I think that divides people in the way that we're talking in this episode, Stranger Things, because it's a cultural phenomenon. And then you saw all these people that you think are total douche knuckles. Like, did you watch Stranger Things? What do you think of Stranger Things? Like, there was this girl I worked with at the jail who was like 5'2" and about 200 pounds and probably couldn't see her cunt without the use of a hand mirror and a spotter.
That's nasty.
And she just was so obsessed with that shit. And I was like, God damn it. That makes me not want to watch it because she sucks.
There was a part of it, like the first couple seasons I liked it because I could watch it with my son. And, it was kind of cool seeing some of the cultural references and how they slipped some of them in there. But then in the later seasons, that's all it was. It was like they were just trying to get in these 80s references. And I'm like, as somebody who grew up in the era, I was like, those things didn't exist at the same time or they didn't come out at the same time. You know what I mean? Like,
basically, the entire premise of the show, The Goldbergs, is how much shit can we cram into one episode?
That's exactly it. That was another show that I liked the first couple seasons, and then after that, I couldn't take it anymore. I'm like, I can't do it. No, like it's just you're overlapping things that never overlapped.
So, as far as again sounding like bitter old men, I'm not saying your new music sucks. That could be a whole nother episode. What I am saying is I don't like it when people who I can't identify with or who are crappy people start to like and affiliate with things that I enjoy. It steals the enjoyment from me. If Donald Trump suddenly became a huge fan of like Lorna Shore, I'd be like, oh, what the fuck is that about? Is there something that I don't know that I'm not reading into with this?
Am I part of something now? Am I, like, maybe you jumped on board of something?
Yeah, I don't want to like go and be outside of a college campus walking by a frat house, and I don't know why I'm there, but I'm just strolling down the sidewalk, and they're like throwing empty beer cans and fucking flashing their buttholes at me. And in the background, you hear, like Fear Factory. You're like, oh, one cool guy lives with you guys, but fuck the rest of you. Who's like, oh, you don't know the song? Why don't you like Transgression? Oh, you're playing Transgression. Oh, that's because you're idiots and it's their worst album. But enjoy 540,000 Degrees, you stupid cunt.
Yeah, and that was another thing too, is when you'd have, not to go back to it, but when you'd have people that would jump on board and they would like the crappy songs or the crappy albums, you're like, oh, you really don't have a clue, do you?
Or they just find out about it and they get way too into it overnight, and then it becomes like a huge part of their personality. You're like, dude, you are the definition of a trend-jumping whore.
But I would see that a lot over the years, like Cradle of Filth. A bunch of the people that jumped on board there, they were just there for the imagery, you know. That's what a lot of black metal was. Even though there was some good music in there, a lot of it was about the imagery. And
Are you saying that it wasn't cool when a bunch of American teenagers wanted to be vampires after fucking flicking their beans to Twilight?
I by that time I had just gotten worn out. You know what I mean? I was just like, you know what? There was goth in the 80s, and then in the 90s it came back again, and now this is just a different version of it. You know what I mean? That kind of dark alternative punk metal. Yeah.
Well, the 90s gave way to neo-goth, into raver culture and steampunk, and then somehow it became vampires.
All in a very short time, too. Just a matter of a few years.
So, I'm glad that this band that I like is going to get money, but now I'm just like, what you're saying, I bet you the material's just going to get way more accessible, and I'm not going to be able to feel anything. Because me and Other Neil once had this argument. He brought it up. I think he heard it somewhere else. Is music art or entertainment? I'm like, it's art. He's like, well, it's entertainment. It's made to entertain you. I'm like, no, it's art because it's personal expression. Mm-hmm. It's not entertainment that's artistic. It's art that entertains.
Sure. I mean, one could make the argument that once you couple it with like a music video or this and that, but when you're talking about just sitting there, you're right. Music is a very personal thing. Everybody gets a different feeling from it. Even if the artist intended certain feelings to be invoked from it, you still get something different out of it.
So all these fucking Johnny-come-latelys that are going to be packed into that goddamn concert, it's going to be a fucking douche fest.
Yeah, tip-to-tip douche fest.
Oh, god damn it. And I'm glad I'm not going to be there. So I have those first two albums to hold on to fondly, but I'm just going to take my fandom and keep it for myself from before, and anything new, I'm putting on an iceberg and pushing it off into the ocean.
C'est la vie.
Interact with the show on Twitter at What Do We Call It? That is at What Do We Call It? You can find us on Facebook at facebook.com/group/What Do We Call It podcast show. For the What Do We Call It podcast, I'm Jmann.
This is Steiny.
And that's the end.